our opinions on the RFPs that were submitted and making a recommendation. And there is a draft letter that I would recommend that we send to the mayor and the city council. Basically, it is, in a nutshell, it is recommending that the YWCA's proposal is more responsive to the RFP and the housing needs of seniors in our community as described in our updated housing production plan, and that it stands in sharp contrast to the proposal submitted by Zeta and by CSI.
Madeline, I'm sorry, could you just clarify, do all trust members have a copy of the draft? I don't remember seeing it, but maybe I missed it, but did you send it out to everybody? Or
Individually, members of the trust have had an opportunity to review it.
okay, thank you.
So I'm opening up for discussion.
Does it make sense to Madeline just shared on screen? Or Andy or anybody?
I don't have a copy because I wasn't given a copy, so
Yeah, I'm going to send Andy a copy of it because hold
And
on.
while you do that, I can just quickly give you my quick 2 cents on it. I think, I think sending a letter to the city council and mayor is a good idea, making our thoughts known on the issue. As opposed, in terms of like the idea that we support the Y above other proposals. I think it's important to know, especially for those who didn't participate on the committee looking at the RF responses. So Madeline and I obviously did that. Both Madeline and I did score the YWCA as the highest ranking proposal. And I don't want to speak for other members of that committee, but at least in a conversation we had at our last meeting, I think most people sitting around the table seem to have positive views of the Y. I think the only other proposal that's even under consideration is the Zeta proposal, which is why I think Madeline draws in her draft the most contrast to that one. And I do think that it would be good if we can also, and I think this what the letter accomplishes this is, stress our, wanting to urge the city council and the mayor to take action on moving forward with YWCA as opposed to say, pausing the process to do more community outreach or, reissuing the RFP altogether in the hopes that we get other proposals. I think, now is the time to strike because we have these proposals in hand, because we've done all the work. So I think the letter hits all those points. And the only thing that I did in the letter, this is the last thing I'll say, is I did make a handful of edits, but I also added some suggested edits just to kind of augment language that is up for everyone's consideration, but by no means do we have to add the language.
I think that's really great. I agree. I'd like to add just further comment about why. Well, first of all, the YW proposal is the most in scope of all of the attributes and all of what we were trying to focus on in the RFP. But Zeta is, to me, completely out of scope. This is not affordable housing. They are not in this deal, and this is clear. I'm not talking out of school here. For the long term, there's no long-term commitment. We are essentially handing over a public asset for them to potentially cash in and make an incredible profit. So our asset of that will go to a for-profit entity at some point later on. And I don't think that's good for Newburyport, and I don't think it's good for the tenants for something to change hands that way. Also, I just want to point out that we're talking about density. If you count bedrooms, The bedroom count, I think in the Zeta proposal is 39 bedrooms. And so, and in the Y's original proposal, I believe it's just 43. So we're talking, and in a potential new version could be less than that. We're talking about, we can't have a density argument here. It doesn't hold water.
That's a great argument, I think. That's a great
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, and with 2-bedroom units and with market rate units, you're just going to have a whole greater impact, a greater impact on the neighborhood in terms of traffic and the things that the neighbors don't want. So I just want to point that out. And then the final thing I'll
Sorry,
say
can I
is-
just interject there?
Yeah, go
Just because
ahead.
I feel like that was actually a very key point, I think, in the whole debate about parking or usage, of the property over, overuse of the property. Should that perhaps be included in the letter of the communication? Because I think if you're trying to communicate
is.
either to the mayor or the
Well,
council, that parking issue, I would make sure that's in there.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm going to interrupt. The point that Suzanne just made about counting the bedrooms is not in the current draft, and I can certainly add that.
I want to let me
Yeah.
check our math first because I want to make sure I got that right.
Well, I think they're proposing 9 2-bedrooms. So, and I did point out in the letter that 2-bedroom units are going to have more cars, and market rate
Correct.
units are going to have more cars.
Yeah.
But we can include, the bedroom count.
Yeah.
That's easy enough to do.
Yeah, and just one final point, and I'll stop talking for the rest of the meeting. I've heard some rumblings that just, well, we're going to be looking at MBTA communities and potentially the 40B at the Kmart site. And so we'll have affordable housing. And I just want to note here in a public domain that this is not the same thing, that those units will not respond to the needs that we need here at the Brown School. We're going to be looking at 80% AMI and above for those developments. And at this point in time, for a one-person household, 80% is $91,300 or in that neighborhood. This will not respond to the needs. So to everyone who thinks that that's going to be enough, it isn't. So that's all I'm going to say.
And if I could just add to that in the public domain, I think anytime that the city is involved in city-owned property, the city has got to address affordable housing officially. I just don't think that the city can use city-owned property in a manner that's not affordable at the utmost, with the biggest effort that we can. So even if we were at 10%, we always need to be addressing affordable. That's our mission, as far as I'm concerned. So I would say in public domain as well, that it needs to be addressed with every public. This was a school, and it's now going to be turned into housing. So it needs to be affordable. That's all.
Thank you. I agree with what everyone said. Forgive me, I turned off my camera because I'm having some connectivity issues. But my concern, I guess, is how do we, as the Affordable Housing Trust, a city body who has the expertise and the experience to know which proposals make sense and to know that the current zoning overlay, which some people think should be held up as the standard, we know that that's not possible. And, the market's responded 20 units is not possible. It's a long letter. It's a great letter. I'm wondering how we if we need to pull out salient points, like Suzanne, I think your point, I hadn't really thought about it that way. If you think about that density argument, that really, it is the same thing with Zeta. It's very close. And yet it's a for-profit, market rate, essentially development where the owners won't even stick around. I guess I'm wondering how we how we really communicate that in a very effective way. Like the mayor is part of the trust. I understand he's not at this meeting. Should we request a meeting? Should, what are the next steps? Obviously send a letter, but beyond that.
You guys mind if I chime in on that? Well, first of all, just on the length of the letter, I agree with Karen. It's a long letter. But I don't think, given the audience and the subject matter, that that's inappropriate. I think it's good to lay out all the details. This has been a long process, right? The school itself has been vacant for 15 plus years, however long it's been. We've had numerous community meetings, we've had studies, we've had other RFP processes, and now we're evaluating three very different proposals. So I think having it all sort of laid out chapter and verse, I think is appropriate, especially with the audience of being the mayor and the city council. So I don't have any issue there. Um, I think as far as requesting a meeting with the mayor, I think the letter conveys what we need, and I think the mayor's been in the discussions regarding the RFP deliberations, so I think he's heard a lot of the back and forth. I know he sent an email out to the RFP respondents that and I don't know if it happened yet. I don't know if it was this week or it's happening next week, that he was going to be meeting with representatives of the Y and Zeta respectively to kind of talk to them about their proposals. I think there's a recognition that, and apologies, I don't remember if this is, I know we say in this letter we want to negotiate with the Y. I think one of the things that we have to recognize as the trust is maybe none of us individually have any issues with the number of units being proposed by the Y currently. But I do think that there's a broader recognition amongst others that even if the Y is selected, that the unit count probably needs to come down. And I think that that's in an effort to kind of gain broader consensus on this. And so I think that's the biggest thing. I think the mayor's going to have to contend with the idea, if he's going to support or bring something forward, is getting some sort of assurance from the Y that they can lower their total unit count to somewhere probably in the 30s, I would imagine, as opposed to over 43 units where they are, where they are now. And then the last thing I'll quickly say is we also talked about the idea of sending a letter to the Daily News, which I think would be a good idea. I don't think this is that letter personally, just because again, it's long and it's going into a lot of detail. I think the pub needs to be distilled down a little bit more, just to explain our general urgency on wanting to move forward with selecting the Y in general. And we can talk about how we do that. I can probably help draft something if you guys want. And then I don't know if we have to, we may have to meet again to discuss that letter, but I think the more important letter at this point is getting something out to the decision-making bodies, like the mayor, like the city council, because they're going to be hearing this sooner than later.
I agree with all those points. I think those are great.
Me too.
I want one more thing on that MBTA and Kmart. The argument should be made in the opposite way, that we will have plenty of market rate rental units when and if all that happens, but we won't have this. So that I just wanted to.
And I think, and I apologize because I hadn't had a chance to see the letter, but I'm assuming it's covered somewhere in here. As like Elaine said earlier, I mean, this we know, with other than the two West End properties that haven't been, disposed of yet, or authorized for disposition, the Brown School is the only city property. So I'm sure somewhere in here it's noted that this is our only meaningful opportunity to create a volume of units, if you will, whatever that number is.
I think it does say that, but it can be added more clearly, maybe.
It's a unique opportunity
Opportunity.
to convert a community asset to respond to a pressing local need.
I would go so far as to even say like a singular, right? Because we don't have one after that. It's the only one.
Right. Okay, well, I've been taking notes. And I can make a couple of edits. But I really do want to get this off. And I was sort of hoping we were going to be able to pass it on to Caitlin today. And I don't know if that's going to happen because I have another meeting after this and City Hall closes. Monday's a holiday. So let's just talk about mechanics here for a minute. If I make some edits based on what we've just discussed, I don't really feel like everybody has to weigh in on it. It's really just adding Suzanne's comment about the number of bedrooms and density, emphasizing that The other development opportunities like Kmart are gonna be primarily market rate and not geared towards housing for seniors. And that this is a singular development opportunity for the city with city-owned property. That with those additions and edits, I feel like we're all in agreement that this is something we want to get off. But so how do we do that?
Can I ask if, just procedurally, if it's of any help? Sorry, Phil, we'll walk one down. Sorry, if it's any help, if members are inclined to approve, as amended, the letter as amended, as Madeline said, I think that's usually a good way of handling something like this, given the time frame. If you're amenable to that or any other edits, you could just, motion to approve with the revised, elements, and then, authorize Madeline to send off the final version. I don't know, we could deal with whether it's electronic signatures or whatever it may, that's not urgent per se. But that way, and I'm happy to do it myself if you want over the weekend, but if you're able to push it out, with an email, I can then make sure, unless you want to send it directly, I can then make sure it goes to the mayor and the council as a body. They all have that over the weekend, even waiting before Tuesday or before Tuesday.
I make a motion that we approve the letter as written with the revisions we just discussed, and that Madeline send that to Andy and Andy send it to the mayor and city council.
I'll second
I
that.
second it.
Okay, Bob, you take the second. There you
I
go.
take the second. Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I have a,
You went on mute, Suzanne.
sorry, and clicked while I was talking. Um, how do we ensure that this, is it possible to send to the planning and development committee too, so that we don't get caught in a receive and file?
Well, I get, we would be sending it to the entire city council as well as the mayor based on you're directing it to both. So all members of the planning development committee would get it. If you wanted, I could put an emphasis on the fact that you want this to be, treated as a communication that goes to, has a docket number, goes to the planning development committee. There's nothing right now, maybe to partly your point, there's nothing in the committee or in the council right now as an actionable item of any kind or a communication. So perhaps you're maybe looking for this to be a formal communication that's on the record, sent to the committee. At least the committee has that. And whatever's happening there, at least the whole council and the committee have that in mind with if something is coming to them for action.
Yeah, I
If
mean,
not, they can receive and file it, and taking it into account,
whatever is gonna, I just don't want this to be, it comes in, it's gone, I want to make sure that it,
I would suggest doing what I've tried to do with some of the communications with the council is just asking them to treat it as a formal communication at the next packet and send it to committees so that at least whether the whole council reviews it or the whole just the committee, at least you have got it in the record as a formal communication. It's not sort of like just an email sent to them, but it's not really understood to be part of the larger dialogue. We don't have anything before them right now, authorizing anything, right? That would come, I think, from the mayor's decision, which way to go and what might move forward to them. Say orders disposition or recommendation for next steps or whatever, but they would have that as a formal communication as part of their, usual procedures, I guess. That would make the most sense to me.
is that okay with everyone else?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Andy, if I make these changes and forward the revised letter to you, I'm also gonna add a date to it. You'll be able to get it off to
Yep.
people hopefully today.
Will do. And also I'll leave it to you guys, but and obviously we're happy to help. But if there's other parties that you want to get, a copy, obviously, feel free to do that as well. But we'll make sure it gets to the mayor and the council.
Great. So, some of us have thought about creating a condensed version as a letter to the editor. I think the points at the end of the letter that we've drafted for the mayor that refer to key points in the HPP might sort of set the stage for the letter to the editor. I think the average reader is not so familiar with the proposals that have been submitted. And so, this letter really comes from something that I drafted for the committee. And so it's a very different vantage point than the average reader of the Daily News. So that's where I think it should be, sort of redirected and just, talking about what's going on in the city as documented in the HPP and how the WISE proposal is responsive to it, whereas Zeta's is not. I mean, you understand, sort of turn it upside down kind of thing.
I would agree with that, and I'd say, I don't even think we have to go into too much detail on what each of the proposals say. I think we can just encourage members of the public to, if they have time, take some time to understand what the different proposals are. But at the end of the day, here's the WISE proposal and why we support it, and maybe giving really short bullet point summaries of the proposals, like number of units, number of affordable units, things like that. And I would say, I can take a stab at that letter if you'd like. And we can talk about, we can maybe reconvene after something like that is drafted and get that off. I would also say, I don't want to like overplay our hand here, but I don't know if, because only so many people may pay attention or look at the Daily News, and I know a lot of stuff behind the Daily News is now behind a paywall. Do we try to get in front of Local Pulse, to get someone on Local Pulse? Do we try to get on Port Media? Would they do like a little thing on this from the Affordable Housing Trust perspective? Just, I don't know. There might be a couple other channels that we can venture down and utilize to get message out.
I agree with those sentiments as well.
I guess the last thing I'll say, I look at this group, obviously, I think a lot of affordable housing trusts around the state are, it's challenging building affordable housing, as we all know. So we have to take that extra step of being advocates, getting in front of people and like pushing a message that goes above, that goes beyond just maybe writing this letter, and then it goes above, beyond us saying what we say in meetings, right? We have to do that extra step of advocacy. So that's why I'm bringing these ideas up.
Well,
Yeah,
I think that's
agree.
important because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. Very frustrating. I mean, the whole idea that, I think the mayor may be still fantasizing that he can have 20 units. It's just, nobody's proposing 20 units, but I think he's still going back to that.
Well, I
I
would
don't think
even say
he's
this.
assuming there'll be 20 units. I think he's comfortable with a higher number. I think he just recognizes that the higher end might still need to be worked on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the more concerning thing for me is, and I'm not going to name who said this, but somebody said in one of the deliberations that they recognize that 20 units is probably out the window at this point, but that the 29 units that Zeta proposes is even a hard sell. And even if somebody came in at 33 units, they would be definitively a no. The idea of that. So to me, I'm thinking to myself, you'll support 29, even though begrudgingly, but you'll support 29, but you won't support 33. So you're going to let a proposal and an opportunity like this die on the back of 4 units. I just think that sums up where some people are on this. So I do think it requires the push and the information and a discussion and getting it out there in the public so people understand what we're talking about here, and that 4 units, 5 units, 6 units should not be the deciding factor to
No.
whether or not the project lives or dies.
No.
Yeah, I would actually, if I could, I would add to that. I'll leave it to you guys whether you want to include it in something that's shorter that goes, to the daily news or otherwise, but it might be worth including in there because it has come up a number of times and will probably be cited again, including by, butters, for instance, in the neighborhood, whose concerns are valid. That this baseline number, we actually heard a resident at the Ward 2 meeting discussing the RFP and what the options were, saying in essence, we already agreed, a number of years ago that this was the cap of what it would be. But the general public may not fully understand this issue that in that zoning, the baseline number of 18 to 20 units, regardless of scenario, which comes from the baseline was youth services and the gym staying on site. In neither scenario otherwise was the unit count ever allowed to go up, even though an entire city department is taken off the property and the gym, which is an assembly space and has its own parking needs if it's fully
Yeah,
utilized
good
in the
point.
neighborhood overlapping the residents would have. And then there's a little bit of denial that went on about whether or not a assembly space would have a parking demand on the street. But if it's not unreasonable to hear to point out and make sure everybody understands that that number they may have in mind and may have been told is a reasonable point for everybody to go forward with was based on a city department and a gym assembly space also being on the property.
And it was also not based on anything received from the market. I mean, no developer said I can do this for 20 units, even if we had that. I mean, I don't know how much people understand that, but on that
Agreed.
level, I know I've seen someone use the word arbitrary. I don't want to, say that it was totally arbitrary, but it was not based on facts. It was not based on what the market can do.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm wondering
Agreed.
if we should add that point too, that the original overlay was determined based upon what Andy just said. That is a really good call out.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, look, a lot of people have
totally
approached me on this and I asked them, and these are just lay people who don't understand housing, but they do understand like what's going on here. I challenged them to, like, looking at the footprint of the Brown School and where it is, I said, do you really think that you with your eye could tell the difference between 29 and 39 units? Would that, like, could you even see that from the street? Like, how would that make it? And they're like, no, I wouldn't be able to tell. I'm like, thank you. It's not a big number.
Well, I
We're talking
mean,
about 50 or 60 or 70 or 100 units, like, at the steam mill or something.
Well, could I ask a question also? I didn't know about the community meetings, and I actually live in Ward 1. I'm looking at the Brown School right now from my backyard. I didn't know about those community meetings. That might be on me. But how is it that Mayor Holliday, what do you call him, previous Mayor Holliday, could come out so negative about the Brown School being, it sounded to me like she was very negative about it. Is there any way we can get someone who knows her, could get to her to be more positive about this? She sounded to me like a real NIMBY who doesn't know the first thing about housing. I don't know her, and I didn't live here when she was the administrating mayor, but I was really surprised at her comments and her.
she chooses not to know anything.
Oh,
I mean,
okay,
she-
so this
she
is
used
not
to
new.
go to housing. She was on the housing trust. I mean, we've been multiple conversations with her.
What?
It's just,
Okay, so you weren't surprised at her comments then?
no, I was shocked,
Oh, okay, all right.
but
Yeah, I
not,
would also add, I worked for and with Mayor Holliday, and I was surprised myself about the comments, the concern about, not necessarily recognizing the unit sizes or the parking needs might be, different for the type of residents that might be living there, but saying that basically all three proposals or suggesting that all three were
Yeah,
too high. I wasn't necessarily surprised if someone said, hey, I think 50 is too high, but I was surprised to see her say that, especially given that we had had that whole discussion about whether or not if youth services goes away, that it might not, necessarily be a 20 unit count. So I was surprised by it as well.
okay, all right. Oh, I really liked Andy, your point about the fact that it's taking away. I didn't recognize that myself, so.
And I think that's unfortunate. That's why I think it's really important that people understand that this
Yeah, me too.
and I realize that's probably not the right word, but that somewhat arbitrary today baseline number, right, that would maybe made sense in a very particular scenario, which I think is, whether it's Madeline or Karen pointed out, was essentially a market rate scenario that it was based on. It was not based on an affordable housing project. That was based on a market rate scenario happening, and with the constraint of a city department and gym.
Right.
So unfortunately, that zoning was not written really to contemplate or facilitate a truly viable affordable housing project. In essence, what it was assuming was only the 2 upper floors were going to be used for affordable housing, and perhaps with the contemplation, because I know it came up at the time, that the housing authority would be able to do it. And when I talked with Tracy Watson at the time, the answer was very obviously, we don't have money to build units, nor that, certainly not the money to build it out with all the costs involved there and spread it over 20 units. We
Yeah.
could run the units if they were there, but we can't build them. So
Right.
that was, I think, a faulty assumption that a 20 unit count on the upper 2 floors, while there's, it's department downstairs, but if that stuff goes away, it's still the same count. That is important, I think, for people to understand.
Definitely.
Just the issue about Mayor Holiday, the other efforts to redevelop the Brown School, they were all done under her and they didn't go anywhere. So there have been fits and starts under Mayor Holiday to try to get this done. And I can't help but think, based on that and the fact that we heard what we heard coming out of her a few weeks ago, that she just has a real hesitancy on doing anything that I think makes sense from a market perspective, similar to what Andy's saying about the baseline number of 20. Again, I think maybe we need to take the word arbitrary out of it, because arbitrary implies that it's just random. I understand that there was a logic behind how they got to 20 units. I would just posit that it was the wrong logic. We can all, any group of people can come to an agreement and consensus on something, but it doesn't mean it's right. It just means that they came to consensus on something, and it may be based on incorrect assumptions, like, hey, the market can support 20 units being built here. And the answer is it can't, because every time we go out to RFP, that is not the case. And we're getting evidence all the time. Even the market rate proposal in this scenario, Zeta, and they're going to make money on this if they do this project, don't make no mistake about it, even they say they can't do 20 units, even with market rate units. So there's no scenario that can support 20 units. That's proven time and time again.
That's a really good point, Drew. That's a really good point. And I appreciate your the language around that, as being that the assumptions turned out to, not fit reality. So not that it was arbitrary, but that the thinking behind it turned out to not be true, or be, however you said it better. The other thing I just want to mention about language, among us, we keep talking about projects and units, and I think all that is fine. When we talk with the public, I think we need to talk about homes, apartments, a development. I think we scare people away a little bit when they hear units and projects, and they just kind of the unconsciously, maybe even, or subconsciously, the image that they have. So I suggest we really, especially for the letter to the editor and anything we do with cable TV or whatever, that we really try to talk about homes and apartments for people who need them.
I just want to chime in on this letter. It doesn't do everything that we've just been talking about. We have, in this conversation, last 15 minutes, we've gotten into the history, and this letter doesn't do that. It could, but it's gonna add, this letter really focuses on why we're supporting the WISE proposal, specifically in contrast to Zeta's. Okay, it doesn't get into the whole history.
We don't need to rehash that again.
Okay, because I feel
Yeah,
like,
I think you're right. You're right, Madeline.
I mean, it would
Too
be
much.
another page. We could do it. But that is not what this particular letter tries to achieve. So I don't know whether people want to keep it the way it is. Do you hear what I'm saying?
No, I think
Yeah.
we should keep it the way it is. I don't think we need to lengthen the letter. I don't think we need to do the history thing. I don't know. There may be an opportunity, I'm assuming, for some, I think it depends on how the letter is received by the city council. Maybe there'll be an opportunity to speak at city council meetings in the future when this is brought forward. And maybe some of that can be delved into in public comment by one
Yeah,
of the
because I think we need to be prepared to do that because city councilors will be doing that. I mean, I saw something and from one city councilor, well, you know, what do we have in the HPP? It was 20 units and now it's 30 units, you know, referring to documents. We know why those numbers were in the HPPs, you know, but I think we need to be prepared to counter those arguments, but that is not what this letter does.
If I may, though, and I agree with entirely with your point that the current letter is intended to address the distinction between the three proposals presently before us. I do think for purposes of understanding why a higher unit count than 29 might be reasonable, and I'm not, or higher than 20, you know, and that goes to the 20, you know, higher than 29, maybe, you know, whether it's 38 or what, you know, 36, whatever it is, ends up being that that is not unreasonable. I think, unfortunately, I think you need a sentence or two in there, perhaps, to clarify where, you know, that baseline, essentially that number that people have in mind and why it is not necessarily unreasonable to have a higher number. I just wonder whether or not without people grasping that, they can't necessarily get to why we wouldn't always be aiming for the lowest number no matter what, you know, because of this comparison to that, you know, previously established number. It's up to you whether you want to include something like that, but I just think that a lot of people, because they don't understand that, are predisposed to think that the lower number count is the only way that it's reasonable for the neighborhood to accept it because they were previously told 18 to 20 units.
Well, I'm starting to feel like I need to work on this and recirculate it, and it's.
You know what? I feel like we should just get it out. I totally agree with what you're saying, Andy, but I feel like we've put a lot of time in it and the time is critical. I don't want Madeline to have to put a lot more work and then we all.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's
I
get it
agree.
out. Let's
Yeah,
get it
I
out.
would say there's more value in getting a letter out. And it's a good letter. It's not like it's not detailed. I mean, we got a lot in there. Could there be a detail more or two? You know, based on what just Andy just said, I don't disagree with what Andy said in spirit. But I think there's maybe more value and more to be gained by getting it out now in the form that it's in now, sooner than waiting another, let's say, 3 to 5 days to push it out.
Yeah, we can always do another letter.
We can write as many letters as we want. We can
I
write a
agree.
weekly letter if we want.
I agree.
Not a bad idea.
All right, well, I will be sending Andy an updated letter and he'll get it out. And this was really great that everybody was able to come together like this. I appreciate it. We don't have another meeting scheduled, so that's something for us to think about. There's a lot going on. Do we want to try to schedule something?
It might be good just if only for the purposes of having everybody here, almost everybody here, obviously you can
Sure.
go from there, but to try to get a time that does work for everybody, it might be good just to coordinate on that, just for that reason alone.
I think we should try to meet if the chairs agree on first 2 weeks in November, because obviously latter half of November, you get into Thanksgiving and things get crazier as you move on into the holiday season. So first 2 weeks of November might make sense.
How does the 13th? I don't want to be mucking up in election week either.
Right. Well, what
Oh,
about the week of November 4th?
That's election week.
Oh, sorry.
The 13th or 14th?
14th is good for me.
What did you say, Karen?
14th is good for me.
14th
Thursday,
works for me.
14th works for me too.
Okay. 6 o'clock, senior center, hopefully.
Yep.
Sure.
Just to note that I have a historical commission meeting, but Andy can be there and we can tag team those two meetings, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, sorry, I was actually trying to bring up the calendar, but another IT issue. That on the calendar, as Caitlin mentioned, there's a historical commission at 7, so I assume because we can't really overlap with Zoom, I'm assuming this would be an in-person meeting only, or?
Yes, in
Yeah.
person.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, so that's perfectly fine. Yeah, so 6 o'clock then, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think we'd have to confirm just to make sure we can get the conference room, so we'll have to check with Diana, just make sure that's all set. Otherwise, we'll
Do
let
we
you know.
want a backup like on the 13th or the 12th in case we can't get it?
Can we say the 13th or the 14th? Does that work?
Yeah, 13th work.
Yeah.
Sure, either one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you have to assume that the mayor might be at the 6:30 here that I see on the calendar for budget. I don't know if you guys
Oh,
can
for
see
the
that, 'cause we
budget.
have a Zoom issue, but
It'd be nice to have the mayor join the meeting if he can.
Is
So
that at
maybe-
senior center, the school committee?
It is at the senior center, yeah. 6:30 PM. It says joint meeting of the school committee and city council on the 2026 budget.
That's the 13th. So let's try everything we can for the 14th. That sound good?
Yeah,
That seems like the best meeting, best
And
date.
if not, the 12th is a backup. Does that work? Is there something then too? I'm just thinking so we don't have to have, we poll us.
We have zoning board of appeals on the.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not good. All right, so hopefully the
And there's
14th.
actually a city council meeting that night as well, so that would probably not be
Yeah,
a very
no.
good night.
Okay, all right, we're hoping for the 14th.
Before we break, I just want to throw out a big thank you to Madeline for writing the letter and to Madeline and Drew together for serving on the committee. I'm sure it was a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of frustration, I'm sure at times. So thank you for doing that for us.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
Been a learning experience. Okay, everybody, have a great long weekend, I hope.
All right,
Take care.
Thank you.
too.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
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 bye-bye.